This is the last video about hamstrings and glutes that you will ever need to watch. We will work our way through every single piece of information that you need to know. That's why this video is split into two parts. First, we will go over everything hamstring related, and then we will look at how to get a nice booty. And by the way, you should definitely not underestimate glute training. You would be surprised how many girls actually find it attractive, so it's something to consider. Anyway, let's start with the hamstrings. You need one hip hinge movement and one isolation exercise. First, let's go over the hip hinge exercises. The hip hinge exercises that I recommend the most are, for example, the Romanian deadlift, the stiff leg deadlift, or good mornings. Any of these exercises will give you an amazing stretch of the hamstrings. And when it comes to the hamstring isolation exercises, it's an easy choice. Do hamstring curls. You really can't go wrong with this exercise. But if you don't have access to the hamstring curl machine, you can go with the Nordic hamstring curl. That is also a very good exercise. One thing that you should keep in mind is that doing only isolation exercises simply won't cut it. You also need to be doing one of the hip hinge exercises, otherwise you will not get anywhere. I know that it's something that you don't want to hear, but it has to be said. Alright, now that you know which exercises you should use, let's go over how many workouts and how many sets you should do per week, and also what kind of rep range you should use. As with a lot of other body parts, 2 workouts per week is where you want to be. And when it comes to the number of sets per week, I highly recommend exactly 12 sets. I believe that 12 sets per week is the ideal spot. There is not really a reason to go over that number, which basically means that you will do 6 sets of a hip hinge exercise and 6 sets of an isolation exercise per week. I will show you a visual representation in a second. As we always do, we will now split the exercises into one main exercise and one isolation exercise. This will make it much easier to understand. So let's take a look at the rep ranges. For the main exercise, we will select one of the hip hinge movements. My recommended rep range for the main exercise is 5 to 15 reps. So you can choose between the 5 to 8, 8 to 12 or the 12 to 15 rep range. Any of these rep ranges are good, so choose based on what you enjoy the most. As I mentioned earlier, for the isolation exercise, we will use either the hamstring curl machine or the Nordic hamstring curl. The rep range for the isolation exercise can be anywhere from at least 8 reps all the way to 30 reps. But most of the time, you should aim somewhere between 12 to 20 reps. Alright, now let's take a look at how to use everything you learned so far about hamstrings in your training plan. This is how the example hamstring focused part of your workout could look like. Now let me quickly explain the difference between the Romanian deadlift and the stiff leg deadlift, because people get them mixed up all the time. There are 3 main differences between the two of them. The first difference is the starting position. On the Romanian deadlift you start from the top position, and on the stiff leg deadlift you start from the bottom position. The second difference is the position of your shins relative to the bar. On the Romanian deadlift you keep the bar close to the shins, and on the stiff leg deadlift you keep the bar away from the shins. And the third difference is the knee flexion. As you can see by the name, on the stiff leg deadlift your legs are stiff, which means they are almost straight. But on the Romanian deadlift you bend the knee a little bit more than on the stiff leg deadlift. This is how you can easily distinguish between the two exercises. And yes, these exercises are very similar, so don't stress if you are not sure which one of them you are doing exactly. As long as you are getting a good stretch in the hamstrings, it really doesn't matter that much. Okay, now let's go over the technique for the hip hinge exercises. This is very important because a lot of people complain that they don't feel their hamstrings at all when they do any of the hip hinge exercises. And they always try to blame it on the exercise, but the problem is in your technique. So this is what you need to do. When you perform a hip hinge movement, think of the hamstrings as if they were strings on a harp. To play, you need the strings to be fully stretched. If they are not, then you are not making any sound. In other words, you are making no gains. This is the number one thing you need to pay attention to when you do any of the hip hinge movements. And don't forget to keep your back straight and keep your chest up. This is essential if you want to perform the hip hinge exercises correctly. Well, this completes the hamstring focused part of the video. Now let's talk about the glutes. Here we also have 2 types of exercises that you need to do. You need one compound exercise and one isolation exercise. Let's go over the compound exercises first. The number one choice here is the hip thrust. This is undeniably one of the best exercises for the glutes, but you need to pay close attention to the technique. But don't worry, we will talk about that in a second. Now let's go over the isolation exercises. Here you can choose from a wider selection of exercises. For example, the butt blaster, glute kickbacks or lunges. If you decide to do lunges, make sure that you do long steps so you can stretch your glutes to the maximum. And also, don't forget that you will get some extra booty gains if you squat ass to the grass. But I think that you are already doing that if you watched the Quad Simplified video last week, so it's all good. Alright, now it's time to see how many workouts and how many sets you should do per week and also what kind of rep range you should use. We all know you don't need to train your glutes directly to make them grow. Doing your standard quad and hamstring work will work your glutes a decent amount, but I would recommend adding at least some glute work to your workout. But if you have made it this far in the video, I think that you are already planning to do so. Well done! The number of workouts that I would recommend for most of the people is 1 to 2 workouts per week. You can go all the way up to 3 workouts per week if you are a girl or just someone who really cares about glutes. For the number of sets per week, I would recommend something between 6 to 12 sets per week. If you decide to train your glutes 3 times per week, then you can go slightly above 12 sets per week. But as I said earlier, this is only for the people who really want to focus on their glutes. For most of the people, 6 to 12 sets per week will be more than enough. That's why it's important to keep in mind that this number does not count the volume you are already doing on leg day. This is the extra volume specifically for your glutes. Now let's split the exercises again into one main exercise and one isolation exercise. The main exercise will be a compound lift for the glutes, so most likely the hip thrust. We want to do the main exercise before the isolation exercise, because we want to be at the peak of our strength. The rep range for the main exercise will be 8 to 12 reps. This is the perfect rep range for the hip thrust in my opinion. For the isolation exercises, you can use any rep range between 12 and 30 reps. It's up to you to decide. This is how the example glute focused part of your workout could look like. As I promised earlier, we need to talk about the hip thrust technique. It's very important that you move the bar all the way up and then squeeze your glutes at the top of the movement. But do not bounce back right when you reach the top. Try to imagine that you want to push the bar through the ceiling. You can think about it in a way that getting to the top of the movement is reaching 100% of the exercise. But I want you to go over that and try to reach 110% of the exercise and then hold that position for like a second, because this extra 10% is exactly where most of the gains are hiding on this exercise. So make sure that you always give it 110%. Well, that's everything you need to know about training hamstrings and glutes. And if you want to learn more about bodybuilding, check out my website where I have tons of free resources prepared for you that will simplify your bodybuilding journey. So what are you waiting for? It's just that simple. And as always, a big thanks to all the supporters on my Patreon. Did you like this video? Then you will for sure like this one too.